In The Hidden Cost of Cultural Racism, Breaking Free from Prejudice, we follow Elena Morales, a high school student whose vibrant cultural identity becomes both her strength and her struggle. When classmates mock her traditional food and dismiss her heritage, Elena faces a painful choice: shrink herself to fit in or stand tall despite the prejudice. Her journey reveals the insidious nature of cultural racism, microaggressions that chip away at self-worth and systemic biases entrenched in education and community spaces. Determined to spark change, Elena organizes workshops and festivals, challenging stereotypes while grappling with backlash from peers and institutions. Yet, her resilience inspires others to confront their own biases, igniting a movement toward empathy and understanding. This story shines a light on the societal barriers faced by marginalized communities and the courage it takes to dismantle them. Will you join Elena's fight for justice? Reflect on her story, and imagine how you can help break free from prejudice today. Let's start. Elena Morales walked through the bustling hallways of her suburban high school, her embroidered bag slung over one shoulder. The intricate patterns on it told a story, her story, but few people here seemed to care about its meaning. Instead, they stared, their eyes lingering just long enough for her to notice before darting away awkwardly. She straightened her posture and lifted her chin slightly, refusing to let their curiosity unnerve her. Quiet confidence radiated from her movements, though inside, she felt anything but confident. The whispers started as soon as she entered the homeroom. "Did you see what she's wearing?" someone murmured behind her. Another voice chimed in, softer but no less cutting, "She looks so different." Elena clenched her fists under the desk, pretending not to hear. Different. That word had followed her like a shadow since the day she transferred to this predominantly white school. It wasn't always said with malice, but it carried weight all the same, a constant reminder that she didn't quite belong. Her ambition burned brightly despite these moments of doubt. Becoming valedictorian was more than a goal, it was proof that she could rise above everything holding her back. But lately, even that dream felt distant. Teachers often mispronounced her last name, classmates laughed when she spoke Spanish at home, and group projects always left her sitting alone until someone reluctantly invited her to join. Each microaggression chipped away at her resolve, planting seeds of insecurity that whispered, "Maybe you don't belong here." At lunch, Elena sat with Mia and a few other friends at their usual table near the window. The conversation flowed easily until Jake leaned forward, his tone casual but probing. "Hey, Elena," he said, smirking. "Do you eat tacos every day? Isn't that, like, a Mexican thing?" For a split second, silence fell over the table. Then laughter erupted, nervous chuckles from some, genuine amusement from others. Elena froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. Heat crept up her neck, spreading across her cheeks. She forced herself to set the fork down carefully, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "My family eats tamales, pozole, mole poblano. We have a lot of traditions beyond tacos." Jake shrugged, unfazed. "Same difference, right?" The dismissive comment hit harder than any insult could have. Around her, the laughter continued, but it sounded hollow now, mocking. Elena glanced at Mia, hoping for some sign of solidarity, but Mia avoided her gaze, fiddling with her straw instead. The disconnect between them, and everyone else at the table, felt suffocating. For the first time, Elena wondered if trying to explain herself was pointless. Would they ever truly understand? When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Elena gathered her things quickly, eager to escape the stifling atmosphere. In the hallway, she caught Mia's arm. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, pulling her friend aside. Mia hesitated, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Look, I get why you're upset," she began, her voice low. "But maybe it's better not to make a big deal out of it. You know how people are, they'll just think you're causing drama." Elena blinked, stunned. "So I'm supposed to just ignore it?" Pretend it didn't happen. I'm just saying, Mia trailed off, shrugging helplessly. Sometimes it's easier to let things go. Letting go wasn't an option, not this time. Elena stepped back, disappointment settling heavily in her chest. If even Mia wouldn't stand by her, who would? That evening, Elena sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the wall without really seeing it. Her mind replayed countless memories, teachers stumbling over her name year after year, classmates imitating her accent during presentations, being left out of study groups because she might slow us down. Each memory stoked the fire of frustration burning within her. How many times had she swallowed her anger, told herself to keep quiet, blend in? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping her out of her thoughts. A text from Mia read, *Hey, sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, *. Elena stared at the screen, unsure whether to respond. Apologies were nice, but they didn't change the fact that Mia, and probably most of their peers, weren't willing to challenge the status quo. As the hours passed, Elena's frustration gave way to something else, determination. She couldn't single-handedly dismantle centuries of prejudice, but she could start small. Maybe it was time to stop shrinking herself to fit into spaces that weren't built for her. Maybe it was time to speak up, not just for herself, but for everyone who felt unseen and unheard. By morning, a plan had begun to take shape in her mind. She would find allies, create spaces where people like her could share their stories, and demand recognition for the richness of their cultures. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be resistance. But Elena knew one thing for certain, staying silent wasn't an option anymore. The next day at school, Elena approached Mr. Patel, the advisor for the diversity club. He was grading papers in his classroom when she knocked lightly on the doorframe. Mr. Patel. Do you have a minute? He looked up, smiling warmly. Of course, Elena. What's on your mind? She hesitated, then plunged ahead. I want to do something about what happened yesterday. Not just for me, but for everyone who feels like they don't belong here. Can we organize something, workshops, maybe? Something to educate people about cultural sensitivity? Mr. Patel leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. That's a big undertaking, but I think it's exactly what this school needs. Let's sit down and brainstorm. Over the next hour, they sketched out ideas for workshops, flyers, and petitions. By the time Elena left the room, her heart was racing with excitement. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of purpose, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. Later that week, Elena stood in front of the diversity club, presenting her plan. We can't fix everything overnight, she admitted. But if we start small, if we show people that our differences are worth celebrating, it could lead to real change. Her words resonated with the group, sparking lively discussions about how to move forward. As the meeting wrapped up, Elena felt a surge of gratitude for the allies she'd found. They weren't just supporting her, they were joining her in the fight for justice. Still, doubts lingered at the edges of her mind. What if no one listened? What if the backlash was too much to handle? She pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task ahead. One step at a time, she reminded herself. One step at a time. By Friday, the first batch of flyers was ready. Elena and her team posted them around campus, inviting students to attend a workshop on cultural awareness. Some passers-by stopped to read them, nodding approvingly, while others scoffed or rolled their eyes. Elena tried not to let it bother her, reminding herself that progress rarely came without pushback. That night, as she lay in bed, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles she couldn't yet imagine. But she was ready, or at least, she was determined to be. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, standing up, speaking out, and refusing to back down. And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future where no one had to choose between honoring their heritage and finding acceptance. The rhythmic chopping of cilantro filled the kitchen as Elena stood beside her mother, helping prepare tamales for dinner. The familiar motions, rolling out corn husks, spreading masa dough evenly, layering fillings, were soothing, grounding her in a tradition that had been passed down through generations. Yet, even here, in the warmth of her home, tension simmered beneath the surface. Why do we even bother bringing this stuff to school? Mateo, her younger brother, blurted out as he leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. His tone was casual, but the words cut deep. People think it's weird. Like, why can't we just bring sandwiches or something normal? Elena froze mid-motion, the spoon in her hand hovering over the pot of simmering salsa. She turned to face him, her voice sharper than she intended. Normal? You mean white people's food? Is that what's normal now? Mateo shrugged, clearly uncomfortable under her gaze. I'm just saying, it's easier if we don't stand out so much. His words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Easier. Stand out. The phrases echoed in Elena's mind long after Mateo left the room. Muttering something about homework. She stared at the tamale in front of her, suddenly feeling the weight of every choice she'd ever made, every time she'd smiled politely instead of correcting someone who mispronounced her name, every time she'd laughed along with a joke at her expense because it seemed safer than speaking up. That night, lying awake in bed, Elena couldn't shake the memories flooding back, teachers calling her Maria despite repeated corrections, classmates laughing when she spoke Spanish during presentations, being excluded from group projects because she might not understand. Each memory felt like a brick added to an invisible wall separating her from everyone else. She wanted desperately to blend in, to be seen as just another student rather than the token Latina. But how could she when even her own brother thought their culture was something to hide? By morning, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but beneath it burned a flicker of resolve. As she got ready for school, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat braid, and her embroidered bag hung over one shoulder, a small act of defiance she hadn't realized she was committing until now. Today, she decided she wouldn't shrink herself to fit into spaces that weren't built for her. Today, she would choose courage over conformity. At school, whispers buzzed in the hallways. News of the lunchroom incident had spread overnight, fueled by hashtags like #StandWithElena. Some students approached her between classes, offering hesitant smiles and murmured words of support. I saw what happened, one girl said shyly. That wasn't okay. You shouldn't have to deal with that. For the first time, Elena felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she wasn't alone in this fight after all. But alongside the encouragement came backlash. Anonymous comments popped up online, accusing her of exaggerating the situation or playing the victim. One post read, "Why does everything have to be about race? Can't you just let it go?" Elena scrolled through her phone during lunch, her appetite gone. The mixed reactions left her reeling, empowered by the solidarity of some, yet crushed by the hostility of others. It was overwhelming, like standing in the eye of a storm while winds raged on either side. In class later that afternoon, she noticed Mr. Carter, her history teacher, glancing at her before quickly looking away. He hadn't said anything about the growing movement, nor had most of the other teachers. Their silence spoke volumes, highlighting the gaps in accountability within the very institution meant to protect its students. Elena clenched her fists under her desk, frustration bubbling over. How could they claim to care about equality when they refused to acknowledge the problem? After school, she sat on the steps outside the building, staring at the horizon streaked with orange and pink. A part of her wanted to retreat, to step back from the spotlight and return to the relative safety of blending in. But another part, the stronger part, knew she couldn't. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone who felt unseen, unheard, unworthy. She took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill her lungs. Being thrust into the role of a symbol was terrifying, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to challenge stereotypes, to demand recognition, to prove that her voice mattered. And maybe, just maybe, she could inspire others to do the same. As she stood and slung her bag over her shoulder, Elena felt a shift within herself, a quiet certainty that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, she wouldn't walk it alone. Dinner that evening was unusually quiet. Elena picked at her plate of tamales, her thoughts swirling like storm clouds. Across the table, her abuela watched her closely, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Mija, what's troubling you?" Elena hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could she explain the weight of the past few days, the laughter in the cafeteria, the dismissive comments, the anonymous trolls targeting her online? She glanced at her parents, who were listening intently, then at Mateo, who avoided her gaze altogether. "It's complicated," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "Some kids at school made fun of me for eating traditional food. And now there's this whole thing online," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward her phone on the counter. Her abuela nodded slowly, as if she'd expected as much. "Let me tell you a story," she said, leaning forward. "When I was your age, I went to a store downtown to buy bread. The shopkeeper refused to serve me because I spoke Spanish. He told me to go back where I came from." She paused, her expression hardening. "But I didn't let him break me. I kept speaking my language, and kept wearing my hair with pride. Because if we lose our roots, we lose ourselves." Elena listened intently, absorbing every word. Her abuela's stories always carried lessons, but this one struck a chord deeper than any before. It wasn't just about resilience, it was about legacy. About honoring those who came before her and paving the way for those who would come after. Later that night, Elena sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her abuela's words replayed in her mind, mingling with the echoes of her own struggles. She thought about the flyers she'd helped design, the workshops she planned to host, the conversations she hoped to spark. For the first time, she saw her efforts not as isolated acts of resistance but as threads in a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven from the strength and sacrifices of generations. The next morning, she woke early and joined her father in the kitchen. He was brewing coffee, humming softly to himself. When he noticed her standing there, he raised an eyebrow. "You're up early. Everything all right?" "I want to talk about something," she said, pulling out a chair at the table. "About what Abuela said last night. About fighting for our culture." Her father set down his mug and sat across from her, his expression serious. "Your Abuela has always been wise beyond her years. What did she say that stuck with you?" "She said we can't afford to lose our roots," Elena replied. "And I realized she's right. If I stay silent, if I let people erase parts of who I am, then I'm not just failing myself, I'm failing her, and you, and everyone who fought to keep our traditions alive." Her father nodded slowly, pride shining in his eyes. "Then don't stay silent, Mija. Use your voice. Make us proud." Those words stayed with Elena throughout the day, bolstering her resolve. At school, she met with members of the Diversity Club to finalize plans for their first workshop. They brainstormed activities, drafted scripts for skits, and divided responsibilities among themselves. By the end of the meeting, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just for herself, but for her family and community. That evening, as she helped clean up after dinner, her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're proud of you, Hija," she said simply. "No matter what happens, remember that." Tears pricked at the corners of Elena's eyes, but she blinked them away. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly supported, not just by her peers or teachers, but by the people who mattered most. And with that knowledge, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Elena Morales sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by crumpled drafts of flyers and half-empty notebooks. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the Diversity Club group chat, but she ignored it for a moment, staring at the blank page in front of her. The weight of what she was trying to accomplish pressed down on her chest like a heavy blanket. She had spent weeks organizing workshops and brainstorming ways to address cultural sensitivity at school, yet doubt gnawed at her mind. What if no one shows up? What if they laugh at me again? Her abuela's voice echoed in her thoughts. Mija, courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what needs to be done even when you are. Elena sighed, picking up her pen and scribbling a new slogan across the top of the flyer, celebrate differences, build bridges. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. The next day, Elena arrived early at school, her arms laden with posters advertising the upcoming workshop. She taped them to bulletin boards, lockers, and classroom doors, ignoring the curious stares of passing students. By lunchtime, whispers spread through the halls. Some were supportive, "Did you hear about Elena's thing?" While others mocked her efforts. "Another diversity thing? Isn't that just performative?" one boy muttered loud enough for her to hear as he walked past. Elena clenched her fists but forced herself to smile politely. "If it makes even one person think twice about their biases, then it's worth it," she replied before walking away. Inside, though, his words stung. Was she wasting her time? That afternoon, the Diversity Club met in Mr. Patel's classroom. The energy was electric, students bounce ideas off each other, their excitement contagious. One girl suggested creating an interactive exhibit where attendees could step into someone else's shoes, literally. They envisioned stations where participants wore clothing associated with different cultures and listened to audio clips of real-life experiences of prejudice. Another student proposed hosting a cultural storytelling session, inviting peers to share personal stories about identity and belonging. Elena nodded along, jotting notes furiously. For the first time since the lunchroom incident, she felt like they were building something transformative, a bridge between misunderstanding and empathy. But organizing the event proved far more challenging than she'd anticipated. Days turned into late nights spent drafting scripts, coordinating volunteers, and reaching out to community leaders for support. Her parents noticed the toll it was taking on her. Her mother would leave steaming cups of hot chocolate by her desk, while her father offered quiet words of encouragement. "You're doing important work, Mija," he told her one evening. "Don't forget to take care of yourself too." Despite their kindness, Elena often felt isolated. Many of her classmates avoided her, unsure how to react to her newfound activism. Even Mia, her best friend, seemed distant now, caught between loyalty to Elena and fear of backlash. "I'm proud of you," Mia said hesitantly during lunch one day. "But I don't know if I can stand up there with you. People might judge me." Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself not to cry. "I get it," she said softly, though her heart ached. "Just promise me you'll come, okay?" Mia nodded, guilt flickering in her eyes. The morning of the workshop arrived, and Elena woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nerves. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that blended her cultural pride with modern style, a flowing embroidered blouse paired with jeans and sneakers. As she walked into the school auditorium, she took a deep breath, surveying the rows of chairs arranged in a circle to encourage dialogue. Volunteers bustled around her, setting up tables laden with traditional foods and informational displays. When the doors opened, students trickled in hesitantly at first, but soon the room buzzed with energy. Teachers lingered near the back, watching curiously, while parents sat along the edges, clutching programs. Elena stepped onto the makeshift stage, her heart hammering in her chest. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "We're not here to argue or assign blame, we're here to listen, to learn, and to grow. Because until we understand each other, we can't truly move forward together." The audience erupted into applause, and Elena felt a surge of gratitude. Over the next hour, the room transformed into a space of connection and discovery. Students laughed during skits that highlighted microaggressions, shared personal stories during breakout sessions, and sampled dishes from cultures they'd never encountered before. By the end of the workshop, many attendees approached Elena to thank her, their eyes shining with newfound empathy. One boy, a senior named Ryan who had previously dismissed her efforts, shook her hand firmly. "I thought this was gonna be lame," he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "But hearing everyone's stories made me realize how much I didn't know. Thanks for putting this together." Elena smiled, relief washing over her. The workshop hadn't solved everything, it hadn't erased prejudice or silenced critics, but it had planted seeds of change. And for the first time, she believed those seeds might take root. That evening, as she walked home under a sky streaked with twilight hues, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She thought about her abuela's resilience, her parents' sacrifices, and the countless others who had paved the way for moments like this. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she let herself dream of a future where no one had to choose between honoring their heritage and finding acceptance. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The backlash came swiftly and mercilessly. By the time Elena woke up the morning after the workshop, her phone was flooded with notifications, most of them hostile. Anonymous trolls had taken to social media, accusing her of exaggerating issues of racism and dividing the student body. Comments ranged from dismissive, "It's just a joke, get over it," to venomous, "Go back to your own country." Each post stung, leaving Elena questioning whether she'd made a mistake by stepping into the spotlight. At school, tensions escalated further. A rival student group, calling themselves the Unity Coalition, organized counter-protests, claiming that focusing on cultural issues detracted from academics. Their banners read slogans like, "Focus on grades, not grievances," and "one school, one community." Some students cheered them on, while others looked uneasy, unsure which side to support. Elena tried to stay focused, reminding herself why she'd started this journey in the first place. But the weight of the opposition pressed down on her, leaving her drained and doubting her ability to keep going. Even Mia, who had promised to attend the workshop, seemed distant now, caught between loyalty to Elena and fear of backlash. During lunch, Elena sat alone at her usual table, scrolling through her phone. Her heart sank as she read comment after comment dismissing her efforts. One post stood out, "Why does everything have to be about race? Can't we all just get along?" The irony wasn't lost on her. Getting along was exactly what she was fighting for, but it required acknowledging the barriers that prevented true unity in the first place. Later that afternoon, a heated assembly meant to address the growing divide turned chaotic. Students shouted over one another, arguing about whether cultural traditions should be celebrated or criticized. Teachers struggled to restore order, but the room remained a cacophony of anger and frustration. Finally, Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Stop," she cried, her tone sharp enough to silence the crowd. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before continuing. "This isn't about us versus them. It's about all of us learning how to coexist, with respect, with empathy, and with understanding." Her words hung in the air, met with a mix of applause and jeers. Though shaken, Elena refused to back down. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew she couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. That evening, Elena confided in her abuela, who listened intently as she recounted the day's events. When Elena finished, tears streaming down her face, her abuela placed a weathered hand on hers. "Mija, resistance is never easy. People fear change because it forces them to confront their own flaws. But remember this, courage inspires courage. For every person who opposes you, there will be another who sees your strength and finds their own." Elena nodded, drawing comfort from her abuela's wisdom. The next morning, she arrived at school determined to push forward. She met with Mr. Patel and other allies to plan their next steps. Together, they decided to host a follow-up event, a panel discussion featuring community leaders and students sharing their experiences with prejudice and resilience. As word spread about the upcoming panel, support began to trickle in. Parents emailed the school administration, praising Elena's efforts. Teachers incorporated discussions about cultural sensitivity into their lesson plans. Even some former critics softened their stance, admitting they hadn't fully understood the depth of the issue until now. Still, the opposition remained vocal. Flyers appeared around campus overnight, mocking the Diversity Club's initiatives. One read, *Enough division. Focus on what unites us. Elena tore them down angrily, her hands trembling. But amidst the chaos, small victories emerged. During history class, a student raised his hand to ask why certain cultures were excluded from the textbook narrative. Another teacher dedicated an entire lesson to unpacking stereotypes, using examples from current events. These moments, though subtle, gave Elena hope. By the end of the week, the atmosphere at school felt different, not perfect, but shifting. Elena realized that change wouldn't happen overnight, but each step forward mattered. As she walked home under a sky streaked with twilight hues, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she let herself dream of a future where no one had to choose between honoring their heritage and finding acceptance. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The courtyard buzzed with energy, a sea of faces filling the space as people gathered for the multicultural festival. Protesters lined the streets outside, their signs held high and voices chanting slogans that carried into the air. Police officers stood at the edges of the crowd, their presence adding to the tension crackling like static electricity. Elena stood backstage, her fingers gripping the edge of the curtain as she peered out at the scene before her. Her heart raced as she scanned the crowd. She recognized familiar faces, her abuela sitting proudly in the front row, Mr. Patel nodding encouragingly, Mia lingering near the back with an uncertain expression. But there were also detractors, their crossed arms and skeptical stares making her stomach churn. The weight of expectation pressed down on her shoulders. This was it, the moment that could either define her movement or dismantle it entirely. Backstage, Elena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone clip to her collar. "You've got this," whispered Sophia, a fellow member of the Diversity Club, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. Elena nodded, though doubt still gnawed at the edges of her mind. What if they didn't listen? What if her words fell flat? She closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. When she finally stepped onto the stage, the murmurs of the crowd faded into silence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, some curious, others hostile. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to meet their gazes, one by one. Taking another deep breath, she began to speak. "I didn't choose this fight," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "No one chooses to be stereotyped, to be told they don't belong, to have their identity questioned every single day. But I realized something, staying silent doesn't protect me, it protects the system that oppresses me. And I refuse to let that happen anymore." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. She spoke candidly about the lunchroom incident, the anonymous trolls who attacked her online, the classmates who dismissed her efforts as unnecessary. Her voice cracked as she recounted moments when she'd felt invisible, erased, unworthy. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. "For too long, we've pretended that ignoring our differences will make them disappear," she continued, her tone shifting from pain to determination. "But ignoring them only allows prejudice to fester. True unity comes from understanding, not erasing, who we are." As she spoke, Elena noticed subtle changes in the crowd. Some students wiped away tears, while others exchanged meaningful glances with friends. Even a few teachers dabbed at their eyes, clearly moved by her words. A boy near the front raised his hand hesitantly, and when she nodded for him to speak, he stepped forward. "I used to think stuff like this didn't matter," he admitted, his voice shaky but sincere. "But hearing your story made me realize how wrong I was. So, thanks for not giving up on us." The crowd erupted into applause, and Elena felt a lump rise in her throat. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her message was getting through. Still, the opposition wasn't entirely silenced. Outside, protests continued chanting, their voices carrying into the courtyard. One man held a megaphone, shouting, "Stop dividing our community. Focus on what unites us." Elena clenched her fists but refused to let the disruption derail the event. Instead, she turned back to the audience. "They're right about one thing," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "We do need to focus on what unites us. But unity isn't about pretending our differences don't exist. It's about embracing them, celebrating them, as part of what makes us stronger." Her words seemed to resonate even with some of the protesters. A few lowered their signs, listening intently, while others continued chanting. Elena knew not everyone would agree with her, but she also knew that change rarely happened all at once. The festival proceeded despite the interruptions. Students visited booths showcasing cultural traditions from around the world, sampled foods they'd never tried before, and participated in workshops designed to foster empathy and understanding. Elena moved through the crowd, greeting attendees and answering questions. At one booth, she found herself face-to-face with Matteo, her younger brother. He looked sheepish as he approached her, holding a plate of tamales. "I wanted to say sorry," he mumbled. "For what I said about bringing ethnic food to school. I didn't get it before, but now I do." Elena smiled, pulling him into a hug. "Thanks, Teo. That means a lot." By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on Elena's shoulders, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. As she packed up the last of the materials, Mr. Patel approached her, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Elena. You brought people together, even if it was just for a moment." She nodded, though she knew the work wasn't over. The festival had planted seeds of change, but nurturing those seeds would take time and effort. That evening, as she walked home under a sky streaked with twilight hues, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The festival hadn't erased prejudice or silenced critics, but it had planted seeds of change. And for the first time, she truly believed those seeds might take root. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she let herself dream of a future where no one had to choose between honoring their heritage and finding acceptance. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks following the multicultural festival, a subtle but undeniable shift began to take root at Elena's school. Teachers started incorporating lessons on cultural diversity into their classrooms, using examples from history, literature, and current events to challenge stereotypes and broaden perspectives. During one class discussion, Mr. Carter, the history teacher who had once avoided addressing racism outright, facilitated a conversation about systemic inequality. "Why do you think certain voices are left out of our textbooks?" he asked, his tone inviting rather than accusatory. Students hesitated at first, glancing around uncertainty. But then Ryan, the senior who had admitted his earlier ignorance during the festival, raised his hand. "Because it's easier to ignore them," he said thoughtfully. "But ignoring them doesn't make the problem go away." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into quiet murmurs of agreement. For Elena, watching these discussions unfold felt like witnessing seeds sprouting after a long drought. It wasn't perfect, some students still resisted, rolling their eyes or muttering under their breath, but progress was undeniable. One afternoon, as Elena walked through the hallway, she was summoned to the principal's office. Her heart raced with apprehension until she saw Principal Thompson smiling warmly behind her desk. "Elena," she began, gesturing for her to sit down, I wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done. Your leadership has inspired real change here." She paused, leaning forward slightly. "We're establishing a permanent diversity committee to ensure these conversations continue beyond this year. And we'd like you to serve as its student representative." Elena blinked in surprise, her chest swelling with pride and disbelief. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "This means so much, not just to me, but to everyone who's been fighting for this kind of recognition." Principal Thompson nodded. "You've shown us what's possible when someone refuses to stay silent. We're lucky to have you leading the way." As Elena left the office, she couldn't help but smile. Recognition wasn't why she'd started this journey, but it validated all the sacrifices she'd made, the late nights, the backlash, the moments of doubt. More importantly, it signaled institutional support for changes that could last far beyond her time at the school. Small victories continued to bloom in unexpected ways. In the cafeteria, Elena noticed groups of students mingling across racial lines, friendships forming where none had existed before. One day, she overheard Mateo laughing with a classmate about a soccer game, their shared love for the sport bridging any lingering awkwardness between them. Even Mia seemed more confident in showing solidarity, sitting with Elena during lunch and openly supporting the diversity club's initiatives. These moments reminded Elena that transformation didn't always come in grand gestures, it often grew quietly, in the spaces between people daring to connect despite their differences. Collaborative projects further strengthened these bonds. In art class, students worked together to create murals celebrating cultural heritage, blending vibrant colors and symbols from diverse traditions into cohesive masterpieces. During science lab sessions, partners from different backgrounds discovered common ground while solving complex problems. Shared experiences replaced suspicion with understanding, proving that empathy could flourish when people chose to see each other as equals rather than strangers. Elena witnessed firsthand how trust grew within these collaborations. She partnered with Ryan on a research project about immigration policies, their initial awkwardness giving way to mutual respect as they exchanged stories about their families' histories. "My grandparents came here in the 70s, Ryan admitted one afternoon. They faced a lot of hate, but they never talked about it. I guess I understand now why they kept quiet." "It's hard to speak up when no one listens," Elena replied softly. "But staying silent only lets the cycle continue." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thanks for helping me see that." By the end of the semester, the atmosphere at school felt markedly different, not perfect, but hopeful. Students greeted each other with genuine warmth, and teachers encouraged open dialogue about difficult topics. The Diversity Committee held its first meeting, drawing participants eager to contribute to lasting change. Word of the school's efforts spread beyond its walls, inspiring neighboring communities to adopt similar initiatives. Local news outlets highlighted Elena's story, praising her courage and resilience. Parents reached out to share how their children had begun questioning biases at home, sparking meaningful conversations around dinner tables. One evening, as Elena scrolled through social media, she stumbled upon a post from a nearby high school announcing plans for their own multicultural event. Beneath the announcement, someone had commented, "If Elena can do it, so can we." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she read the message. This ripple effect, this proof that her actions had sparked widespread transformation, was more rewarding than any award or accolade. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Change hadn't come easily, it had demanded every ounce of strength and determination she possessed. But it had also revealed something beautiful, the power of collective action, of ordinary people choosing to stand against injustice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she let herself dream of a future where acceptance wasn't an exception, it was the norm. And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever came next. Elena sat on the edge of her bed, a notebook resting in her lap as she stared out the window at the fading sunlight. The past few months had been a whirlwind, moments of triumph mingled with heart-wrenching challenges, but now, for the first time, she allowed herself to pause and reflect. She flipped through the pages of her notebook, each entry a snapshot of her journey, scribbled notes from late-night brainstorming sessions, sketches of flyers for the multicultural festival, and quotes that had inspired her along the way. Her mind drifted back to the lunchroom incident, the laughter, the humiliation, the anger that had sparked this entire movement. That moment had felt like a breaking point, but looking back, it was also the beginning of something transformative. "I didn't choose this fight," she whispered aloud, echoing words she'd spoken on stage during the festival. Yet here she was, standing taller than ever before, having ignited change not just within herself but within her community. Still, Elena knew the work wasn't over. Systemic racism ran deep, like roots tangled beneath the surface, and dismantling it would take more than one person or one victory. As much as she celebrated milestones like the diversity committee and newfound unity among students, she couldn't ignore the realities still facing marginalized communities beyond the school walls. Her thoughts turned to Mateo, who had recently confided in her about being teased for speaking Spanish in class. "It's not fair," he'd said, his voice trembling with frustration. "Why do they think it's weird?" Elena had hugged him tightly, promising to keep fighting so he wouldn't have to carry the burden alone. Moments like these reminded her why vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. Opening up about her own struggles had empowered others to share theirs, creating connections that fueled collective action. The next morning, Elena met with representatives from a local nonprofit called Unity Forward. They gathered around a table cluttered with laptops, sticky notes, and steaming cups of coffee. "We're thrilled to partner with you," said Marisol, the organization's director, smiling warmly. "Your story has already inspired so many people in our network." Elena nodded, feeling both proud and humbled. Together, they outlined plans for workshops aimed at educating broader audiences about cultural sensitivity and racial bias. One idea involved hosting storytelling events where participants could share personal experiences of prejudice and resilience. Another focused on creating educational materials for teachers and parents to foster inclusive environments outside of schools. As weeks passed, Elena threw herself into the work, traveling to neighboring towns to collaborate with community leaders. In one town hall meeting, she stood before an audience of skeptical faces, their arms crossed defensively. "Change is uncomfortable," she admitted, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But staying silent only protects the systems that divide us. We can do better, for ourselves, for our children, for everyone who deserves to feel seen and valued." By the end of the session, several attendees approached her, expressing gratitude for sparking conversations they hadn't known how to start. "You've given us hope," one woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Hope that things can get better if we're willing to try." Back home, Elena worked tirelessly to create resources that would outlast her efforts. She collaborated with teachers to develop lesson plans centered on diversity and inclusion, ensuring future generations would learn about empathy and equity from an early age. She also launched a mentorship program pairing high school students with younger peers, fostering leadership skills while building bridges across cultural divides. One evening, as she packed up materials after a workshop, Ryan approached her, holding a flyer for an upcoming event. "This is amazing," he said, gesturing to the flyer. "I never realized how much I didn't know until you started opening my eyes." Elena smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It's not just me," she replied. "It's all of us working together. Change happens when we lift each other up." That night, as she walked home under a sky streaked with stars, Elena thought about the legacy she was helping to build. Her journey wasn't just about addressing injustices, it was about planting seeds of understanding that would grow long after she moved on. Each workshop, each conversation, each shared story was a step toward a future where acceptance wasn't the exception but the norm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she let herself dream of a world where no one had to fight to belong. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. Elena stood in front of a small group of middle school students, her hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. The room was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of feet or rustle of notebooks. She had volunteered to lead a mentorship program aimed at empowering younger students to embrace their cultural identities, a role she hadn't anticipated but now felt deeply honored to take on. Being proud of who you are isn't always easy, she began, her voice soft but steady. Especially when the world tries to tell you that your culture, your language, your traditions don't belong. But I'm here to remind you, they do. And so do you. The students looked up at her, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. One boy, Javier, sat slouched in his seat, arms crossed tightly over his chest. Elena recognized the look. He reminded her of herself at that age, unsure whether it was safer to blend in or risk standing out. After a moment, she continued. I want to share something with you. When I was in high school, I brought tamales to a potluck once. Some kids laughed and called them weird. It hurt, but instead of hiding what made me different, I decided to celebrate it. Now, those same foods have become a way for me to connect with people, to show them the beauty of my heritage. Javier raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. But what if they still laugh, he asked, his tone sharp with frustration. What if nothing changes? Elena nodded, understanding the weight of his question. It's okay to feel angry or scared, she admitted. But remember this, every time we speak up, every time we refuse to hide, we plant a seed. Maybe not everyone will listen right away, but someone will. And that's how change starts. Over the following weeks, Elena worked closely with her ments, sharing stories from her own life and encouraging them to open up about theirs. During one session, a shy girl named Sophia hesitantly spoke about being teased for wearing traditional clothing to a family wedding. They said I looked weird, she murmured, staring down at her hands. Elena knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. Sophia, your clothes aren't weird, they're beautiful. They tell a story about where you come from, about the people who love you. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of that. Slowly, Sophia lifted her head, a flicker of determination replacing the uncertainty in her eyes. By the end of the program, many of the students had begun carrying themselves differently, shoulders squared, voices stronger, as though they were beginning to see their worth reflected back at them. Beyond the mentorship sessions, Elena's advocacy extended into classrooms across the district. Thanks to her efforts, schools adopted revised curricula featuring diverse perspectives. History lessons now included stories of indigenous resistance, civil rights movements led by women of color, and immigrant contributions to modern society. Teachers introduced novels written by authors from underrepresented communities, sparking discussions that challenged long-held stereotypes. In one classroom, Elena watched as a teacher played a video featuring interviews with local activists. A student raised her hand, her brow furrowed. Why didn't we learn this stuff before, she asked. The teacher smiled gently. Because sometimes, important voices get left out. But thanks to people like Elena, we're working to fix that. Elena felt a lump rise in her throat. These changes weren't just about correcting omissions, they were about ensuring future generations grew up seeing themselves in the narratives around them. New resources flooded classrooms, interactive lessons on cultural appropriation versus appreciation, workshops on empathy building, and even virtual reality experiences allowing students to step into someone else's shoes. One afternoon, as Elena helped organize materials for a workshop, Matteo walked in, holding a flyer for an upcoming event. You know, he said, glancing at the flyer, you've changed a lot of things, not just here, but everywhere. She turned to him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. I didn't do it alone, she replied. It's all of us, working together. Matteo nodded thoughtfully. Still, you started it. People are listening because of you. That evening, as she packed up her bag, Elena paused to reflect on the legacy she was helping to build. Her journey wasn't just about addressing injustices, it was about laying foundations for a more equitable future. Each lesson plan, each resource, each shared story was a step toward a world where no one had to fight to belong. As she stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin, she glanced up at the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she allowed herself to dream of a brighter, more inclusive tomorrow, one shaped by understanding rather than division. And with that thought, she headed home, ready to face whatever came next. Years later, Elena stood on a stage bathed in golden afternoon light, gazing out at the vibrant sea of faces gathered before her. The multicultural festival buzzed with energy, laughter mingled with music, the aroma of diverse cuisines wafted through the air, and children ran between booths adorned with colorful flags. It was a celebration not just of culture but of progress, a testament to how far her community had come since that first workshop years ago. As she adjusted the microphone, Elena felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. She scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces, young students she had mentored, teachers who had supported her early efforts, neighbors who had once been skeptical but now embraced inclusivity. Her abuela sat proudly near the front, her eyes shining with pride. Even Mateo was there, clapping along to the rhythm of a live drum performance. "Thank you all for being here today," Elena began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "This festival isn't just about celebrating our differences, it's about honoring the journey we've taken together to get here." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. "When I first started this work, it felt like shouting into the wind. I faced resistance, doubt, even hostility. But what kept me going was knowing I wasn't alone. Every one of you has played a part in creating this moment, a community united by understanding rather than divided by fear." Her gaze lingered on Javier, now a teenager, standing confidently beside his younger sister. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, as if silently thanking her for believing in him when he hadn't believed in himself. Elena continued, her tone shifting from reflection to resolve. "But let's be clear, this isn't the end of the road. Progress isn't something we achieve once and then forget about. The fight against cultural racism is ongoing, and it requires vigilance. We must continue challenging stereotypes, dismantling systems of oppression, and amplifying voices that have long been silenced." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. One woman raised her hand hesitantly, and when Elena nodded, she spoke up. "What can we do? How do we keep moving forward?" Elena smiled warmly, appreciating the sincerity behind the question. "Start small," she replied. "Speak up when you hear someone make a biased comment. Support businesses owned by people from underrepresented communities. Educate yourself, and others, about histories and perspectives different from your own. Change begins with action, no matter how small it seems." Her words seemed to resonate deeply, heads nodded, and some attendees jotted notes in their programs. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, leaning slightly toward the audience. "And don't think this responsibility rests solely on my shoulders, or anyone else's. This is a collective effort. Each of you has the power to inspire change in your own circles. Take what you've learned here today and pass it on. Empower others to join us in building a world where everyone feels seen, valued, and respected." As she finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing across the courtyard. Children waved handmade signs reading "Unity through Understanding" and "Together we thrive." For a moment, Elena allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of what they'd accomplished, not just for themselves but for future generations. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the festival in hues of orange and purple, Elena wandered through the booths, pausing to chat with attendees. At one booth, she found Sophia, the shy girl who had once been teased for wearing traditional clothing, now leading a demonstration on embroidery techniques. Sophia grinned broadly as she showed off her work, clearly proud of her heritage. "You're amazing," Elena told her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Keep sharing your story. The world needs more people like you." Sophia beamed. I wouldn't have done any of this without you. You taught me it's okay to stand out. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. These moments, the ripple effects of her advocacy, were what made every struggle worthwhile. As the festival wound down, Elena climbed back onto the stage for closing remarks. The lights twinkled overhead, and the cool night breeze carried the faint strains of music still playing in the background. We've come so far, she said softly, her voice carrying across the quieting crowd. But remember, hope isn't passive, it's active. It lives in the choices we make every day to challenge prejudice, to listen, to learn, and to act. Together, we've shown that unity isn't about erasing our differences. It's about celebrating them as strengths. She took a deep breath, her final words ringing with conviction. Let's carry this spirit forward. Let's build a future where no one has to fight to belong. Because when we choose empathy over division, justice over silence, and love over hate, anything is possible. The audience erupted into applause once more, many rising to their feet. As Elena stepped off the stage, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not because the work was done, but because she knew it would continue without her. That night, as she walked home under a sky scattered with stars, Elena allowed herself a quiet moment of gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she dreamed of a brighter, more inclusive tomorrow, one shaped by the actions of countless individuals committed to justice and equality. And with that thought, she stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. If this story inspired you, did Elena's journey move you? It's like if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right. Share this story to remind others that one voice can spark a revolution.